Imagine living on an isolated farm, miles from the nearest neighbor. Now imagine finding a set of footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the dark woods directly to your door. You check the porch. You check the barn. You find no footprints leading back out. You are alone on your land, but you aren't alone in your house. Part 1. The Lonely Farm. In 1922, the world was a different place. In the deep heart of Bavaria, Germany, lived the Gruber family. Their farm was called Hinterkaifeck. It was a cold, gray place, tucked away behind a thick wall of pine trees that seemed to swallow the sunlight even at noon. The patriarch was Andreas Gruber, a man in his 60s who was as hard as the frozen earth he farmed. He wasn't liked by the locals in the nearby town of Kaifeck. He was surly, aggressive, and harbored secrets that whispered through the village, dark rumors of how he treated his daughter, Victoria. Living on the farm were Andreas, his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria, and Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Josef. For months, the farm had felt off. The previous maid had quit suddenly, terrified. She claimed the house was haunted. She spoke of footsteps in the attic when no one was up there, and the feeling of eyes watching her from the shadows of the barn. Andreas had laughed at her. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in what he could see, in what he could hit. But in March of 1922, even Andreas couldn't ignore the physical evidence that something was very, very wrong. Part 2. The Footprints. It started with a heavy snowfall. One morning, Andreas stepped out onto the porch and stopped dead. There, leading from the edge of the dark forest across the pristine white field, were footsteps. They were deep, heavy boot prints. Andreas followed them. They led straight to the back door of the machine house. His heart hammered against his ribs as he looked for the return trail. He walked around the entire building. He scanned the forest line. There were no exit prints. Whoever had walked out of those woods had entered his building, and they had never left. Andreas searched the farm with a lead pipe in his hand. He checked the barn, the hayloft, and the tool shed. Nothing. He found the lock on the machine room had been tampered with. Then he found a newspaper on the porch. It was a newspaper from the city, one that none of the family had bought, and one the postman hadn't delivered. That night, the family sat in the kitchen in total silence. The wind howled through the pines, sounding like a woman screaming. Suddenly, they heard it. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from directly above them, in the attic. Andreas grabbed a lantern and climbed the creaky stairs. He searched every corner of the attic, moving aside old trunks and piles of grain. It was empty, but as he turned to leave, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. The heavy layer of dust on the floor had been disturbed. There were fresh scuff marks leading toward the vents that looked down into the living quarters. Someone had been lying there, peering through the slats, watching the family eat their dinner. Part 3. The Arrival. Despite the terror, the farm had to run. On March 31st, 1922, a new maid arrived. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She was young, nervous, and desperate for work. Her sister dropped her off at the gate, watched her walk toward the gray farmhouse, and waved goodbye. Maria would not live to see the sunrise. What happened that night is a reconstructed nightmare based on the blood-spattered reality the police found days later. It is believed that one by one, the family members were lured into the barn. Perhaps they heard a noise. Perhaps they heard the cattle lowing in distress. First was Andreas. He entered the dark, hay-scented barn, peering into the gloom. Out of the shadows, a heavy tool, a mattock, a sharp-edged pickaxe, swung through the air. The blow was precise. It crushed his skull instantly. Then came the elder Cecilia, looking for her husband. She met the same fate. Then Victoria, then the 7-year-old girl, little Cecilia. The killer was efficient. He was calm. He was strong. The bodies were stacked one on top of the other in the corner of the barn, covered with hay and an old door. But the killer wasn't done. He walked back into the house. He walked past the kitchen where the evening meal was still on the table. He went to the maid's room. Maria Baumgartner was likely unpacking her things, wondering about her new life. She never heard him enter. The mattock fell again. Finally, the killer went to the nursery. 2-year-old Josef was asleep in his crib. The killer didn't hesitate. In the silence of the Bavarian night, the last of the Grubers was gone. Part 4. The Guest. This is where the story shifts from a tragedy to a waking nightmare. Most killers flee the scene. They run as far and as fast as they can. But the ghost of Hinterkaifeck didn't leave. For the next 4 days, the killer lived in the house with the corpses. Neighbors later told the police they saw smoke rising from the chimney all weekend. They saw a light moving in the windows at night. When the postman came to deliver the mail, he noticed the dogs were tied up, but someone had fed them. The cattle in the barn had been fed and watered. The killer had even sat in the kitchen and eaten the family's bread and meat. He slept in their beds, while their bodies rotted yards away in the barn. He moved through the house like a shadow, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the food in the pantry. He was a guest in the house of the dead. Part 5. The Discovery. By April 4th, the village grew suspicious. Little Cecilia hadn't shown up for school. The family hadn't been to church. A group of men from the village decided to walk out to the farm to check on them. When they entered the barn, they found the stack of bodies. The sight was so gruesome that several of the men fled into the fields to vomit. The police investigation was a disaster. Because it was 1922, they lacked modern forensics. They actually sent the heads of the victims to Munich to be examined by psychics who claimed they could see the killer's face by holding the skulls. It yielded nothing. The suspects were many. Some thought it was Victoria's dead husband, Carl Gabriel, who had supposedly died in the trenches of World War I. Rumors circulated that he hadn't died, but had returned, seen the state of the farm, and snapped. Others suspected a local man who wanted to marry Victoria for the farm's money. But the money was still there. Thousands of gold marks were found in the house, untouched. This wasn't a robbery, it was a harvest. Part 6. The Conclusion. The Hinterkaifeck farm was eventually torn down. The villagers couldn't stand to look at it anymore. Today, only a small stone monument stands in the middle of a silent field. The case remains unsolved to this day. The most terrifying thought isn't the murder itself, it's the footprints. It's the idea that for days, perhaps weeks, a man lived in the attic of that house. He listened to their conversations. He knew their names. He watched them through the cracks in the ceiling. He waited until the perfect moment to come down. And when you go to bed tonight and you hear a soft thud in the crawl space above your head or a floorboard creak in the hallway, ask yourself, did you check the snow for footprints today? And more importantly, did you check if they lead back out?